Thank you for joining us on our QTV Business and Economy program. The Business and Economy program is intended to promote the ideals of a corporate Gambia identity with the objective of forging partnership through dialogue between the public and the private sector, civil society organizations, and the international community. In today's episode, we shall be discussing a recent pronouncement by the Chief of Defense Staff of the Gambia National Army. It is common knowledge now that the CDS had made a pronouncement that the Army will be engaging in commercial agricultural production. The question is commercial agricultural production a mainstay of the National Army? Yes, it is true that the military in other parts of the world, Egypt in particular and Pakistan to some extent, are engaged in agricultural production. But what has that brought for economic development of those countries, and what are the social implications? These, amongst others, would inform our discussion over the next 1 hour. To help me in our discussions, I have invited Dr. Usman Gajigo. Dr. Usman Gajigo is no stranger to this program, and he'll be joining us in our discussions today to help shed light and bring about pertinent issues as a result of the concerns of the citizenry. Dr. Gajigo, a warm welcome to the Business and Economy program.
Thank you for having me.
It is an interesting topic that we are discussing today, but perhaps as a prelude to the program, I know you are engaged in agriculture. You're a farmer. I'm also a farmer. Of course, you are on the crop side. I'm on the animal husbandry side. But could you give us an overview of what you do in farming?
Sure. Actually, I just arrived yesterday evening from one of my farms in the North Bank region in Badibu. So we have two sites, one in West Coast region, just in Basori, and one in Sabak Sanjal. We actually do quite a number of crops. We're not specialized in one, but the main crops being pineapples, avocados, citrus, bananas, papayas, and cashew, of course. We've tried to introduce new varieties that previously were not in the country, principally varieties like Solo. I think currently we may be the only farm that is actually doing commercial pineapple production. We've done a trial run 2 years back, and that was successful. And now we've expanded the farm, and we have quite a significant area. We should be able to have our second harvest the following year. It's been a tough going, as you know. Starting a business in the Gambia is not easy. We have a very challenging investment climate. Access to finance is still very tough. Infrastructure is still a problem. Finding skilled workers in the sector in agriculture is tough, but we've managed to overcome obstacles gradually, and I think we are making quite a progress.
Okay. Interesting, but maybe to delve into the issue at hand, as I indicated in my introductory remarks of the program, the CDS's recent pronouncement in regards to the budding partnership, if you will, between AGCO company, a U.S. company based in South Africa, which is trying to enter into a partnership with the Gambia government, but of course it is the military, the Gambia National Army, that is featured more in this partnership than, say, for example, the Ministry of Agriculture or any of the other investment-based institutions of the country. I could name GIPA, I could name the Public-Private Partnership Unit at the Ministry of Finance. So the military seems to be in the lead. And the point that was made by the CDS, General Masane, Lieutenant General Masane Kinte rather, to which the presidency seemed to be giving support, is that the military is going to be engaged in agriculture and is going to be engaged in a whole host of agricultural activities. He even went to the point of saying this is a constitutional right of the military. What do you reckon are the possible reasons in terms of the military wanting to engage in agriculture? Because agriculture is not their mainstay. So why do you reckon the military would be wanting to engage in agriculture?
Yeah, it beats me. I find it quite puzzling. I mean, as you mentioned, agriculture is a very key sector in the economy. I mean, we have a whole Ministry of Agriculture. On top of that, we have a government agency, as you rightly noted, GAIPA, which is in charge of oversees the apex, body in terms of overseeing foreign direct investment, and one of their priority sectors is agriculture. We also have the Directorate of Public-Private Partnership at the Ministry of Finance. These, to me, are the key institutions in the country that should be taking the lead on any foreign investment across any sector, but principally in agriculture. So why the military is engaging in commercial agricultural activities, it's puzzling to say the least. We all know the real and the fundamental, role of the military is towards safeguarding the territorial integrity and protect the country against external threat. This should be the main focus of the military. It doesn't mean that if you sit one day and there is no threat against the government, then your job in that area is done, and you therefore need to start looking for other things to fill up your time. It's interesting you noted that the CDS mentioned that the Army's involvement in commercial agriculture, it's a constitutional requirement. I find that a bit strange. Strange perhaps that this would be something that the CDS would reference. But I am not surprised that he did reference that, because this was something the 1997 Constitution actually included. But the problem is we have the CRC, the Constitutional Review Commission, for a reason. Everyone recognizes that the 1997 Constitution is not something that is fit for a democracy. There's a reason why currently there's a consultative process going on to completely revamp and reform the Constitution and have something that is consistent with a democracy. Now, if you as an institution in the country is referencing a clause in the Constitution that has such a problematic aspect, that's something that was inserted, that the dictator insisted being inserted to provide a veneer of constitutionality to his own private agricultural activities, then I think the CDS need to sit down and reflect very carefully about what his fundamental roles are, and recognize the fact that this is really not only the role, but the military has no capacity whatsoever to engage in commercial agriculture. The sector is too important for us to have too many, the wrong institution being in there, the wrong institution that is completely ill-equipped to handle the challenges that are there.
I want to come to a parallel that you drew, in which you sort of drew attention, and I believe this was an article that appeared in the Chronicle, in which you drew a parallel and called the attention of the citizenry to the fact that when we go back to the 1994 coup d'etat, and as per the revelations in terms of the TRRC, when Sana Sabali was called to testify, you made the point that despite the repeated questioning by the lead counsel, Esa Fall, in terms of why the military had actually undertaken to remove a democratically elected government, Sana Sabali kept insisting that this was done largely because they thought that it was their responsibility under the provisions of the Constitution to address the degrees of corruption that existed at the time. And you drew a parallel in terms of the same point that the CDS is making, that the Constitution provides them, a mandate for them to be engaged in agriculture. So the question is, how do we now change that mentality within the mindset of the military for them to understand that as long as the Constitution is concerned, it is not in their mandate to interpret nor to use the Constitution as a reason for them to be doing some of the things that they intend to do, like trying to be the formidable player within the agricultural sector, nor trying to remove a democratically elected government because of your perception of the level of corruption and the degree of corruption in the country. How do we change that mindset? I ask this question because there is an ongoing process in terms of revamping the Gambian National Army, because, I mean, the point has been made that since the departure of President Jammeh, that there was a need for the army to be repositioned. There is a need for the army to be reviewed. So that process and that review is going on, and there was a whole host of hope in terms, you know, from the citizenry, in terms of trying to enable the army to become a more professional body. So now you have a situation where they seem to forgetting that repositioning is ongoing, and are now trying to come and say we're now going to involve in agriculture. So how do we change mentality within the army for them to focus on what it is that they've been mandated to do, which, as you rightly said, is to protect the territorial integrity of this country and to provide security for the citizenry of this country?
Right. No, that is the fundamental question. I mean, without reforming the mentality, I mean, forget about it. You have not ruled out the threat of a future military coup. You know, as long as you have a military in the country, the threat of a possible military coup still remains. Now, I found it quite interesting, but I mean, actually shocking when I was, you know, when this parallel force came to me. Because here you have somebody who was in the military for, I mean, he was a lieutenant in the military, Sana Sabali. But even after years, 22 years of after leaving the military, still could not, I mean, the misconceived notion he had about the role of the military, he never really evolved on that. And then, you know, you could have written that off as an exceptional case until you see this pronouncement by the CDS, which is very troubling. Basically, the fundamental problem we have is that this problem of lack of understanding of the role of the military is something that is ingrained in the military. And after some reflection on this, I have come to the conclusion that it is not an issue of training, whether maybe the basic training the recruits go through was inadequate, or whether the officer training that soldiers are provided is inadequate. I mean, some of these soldiers were basically sent to Fort Benning in Georgia, some of them to Turkey.
Sandhurst?
Yes, Sandhurst in UK, some of them to, you know, other countries that we have partnerships with. So there is no lack of training. But what I've emphasized in that article is, you know, it sounds a bit elitist to say, but it's the fact of the matter. The quality of recruits in our army is not good. I mean, there's no beating around the bush in it. You know, when you have a poor quality intake, you can do all sort of in-service training. You're not going to upgrade that quality. When you have, you know, the analogy would be like, take a building that has a very poor foundation. You can do all sort of renovations later on. This building will have, the structural integrity of this building will never be improved if the foundation quality is not there. This is the fundamental problem. We, as a country, we do have a problem with limited capacity, but that limited capacity is, you know, that capacity shortage is magnified 1,000-fold in the military, because a lot of the people who end up in the military end up there as a last, you know, choice, not something, you know, they didn't go in there because they possess some unique skills that is required by the military, but because they've tried other sectors that didn't work. Now, obviously, this is not true for every single person in the military. I know of people who are incredibly smart, who are competent, but those, unfortunately, are the exceptions, really not the rule. So when you have an institution where the quality intake of people in that institution is poor, you know, no amount of training, no amount of officer training, no amount of, they could spend a decade in Sandhurst, they could spend another 10 years in Fort Benning. You know, you cannot change some unalloyed metal into gold. You know, it's just in the basic nature of it. This is to me is a very sobering reflection that we need to come to terms with. This is a fundamental problem, and you see this in the senior officers who are being interviewed in front of TRRC. They can't make simple arguments. You know, given you know, 1 + 1, you know, they conclude, you know, 3 instead of 2. The logic is incoherent. Decades of the military hasn't, you know, really giving them the, you know, the skills and the, you know, the capacity that you hope it would. So, to me, this is something that we need to grapple with when we are trying to reform the military. when we are trying to reform the military, the problem I have seen is that there is a lot of focus on problems that happened during the Jammeh era, you know, saying that the military is politicized. But the fact of those problems are the effects of the fundamental problem of the military, not the cause. The fundamental problem of the military we have was that the military as an institution broke faith with the country by engaging in the most treasonous act that led to a 22-year dictatorship. This is the fundamental problem. Other problems, obviously, in the midst of grappling with this fundamental problem, you can address them. You know, we have a military during Jammeh's era that was engaged in internal law enforcement. That's no role for a military. We have a military that was engaged in agriculture. That's not a role for the military. We had a military that was, you know, basically a law unto itself. You would have a soldier could arrest you during Jammeh's era. But what is happening today in this new government? We still have a military that is engaged in internal law enforcement. There are military checkpoints all over the country. I was personally stopped at I had an incident a few days ago at Kalaji, where a military officer wanted to force me to get off the road. And I insisted that he couldn't detain me, and he brandished his weapon. This happened to me while I was going to my farm. You have a military officer trying to do law enforcement activities. That's not the role. We have CDS, the Chief of Defense Staff, in the same behavior and manner that only developed during Jammeh's dictatorship. During Jawara's era, you do not see a CDS with a huge motorcade that is only dwarfed by the president. We still have that situation. A real reform in the military will address those low-hanging fruits rather than trying to go into activities that you don't have the capacity for, that is not in your area. You have real problems in the military. Address those. The army is currently 5 times what it was during Jawara's time. You know, why not reduce the military right now? I'm not saying close it. That's something I would actually advocate. But as a first step, have a significant reduction in the army, so that the budgetary requirement is something the country can afford. As a share of our GDP, the budget that's going to the military in the Gambia is one of the highest, not only in Africa, in the world. As a poor country, do we need that? We have education sector, we have the health sector, we have infrastructure that need resources, and then we are taking this significant amount of money and putting in a military, when the the basic need of the military itself is not something that is obvious to us.
Actually, it's interesting you make that point, and since you've already made it, I would just latch onto it, because the same article that you published in the Chronicle pinpointed the quantum of financial resources that is being spent on the military, and here we're looking at around $700 million annually. That's quite a sizable chunk, and you make the same argument that these monies could be better spent into education. It could be better spent, into health, or even, addressing basic infrastructural challenges that we have in the country. If we look at NAWEC, as a case in point, despite the number of investments that is happening in there. Now, the point I want to ask is this. Perhaps the CDS, as the head of the army, wants to find a way of justifying the quantum of funds or the budget that is directed to the military. And that being the case, and them knowing that as it stands right now, currently in this country, the military is not seen to be living up to much. And perhaps because of this, the CDS, in his good wisdom, have thought it fit that let us go into agriculture and then we can prove our worth, because people are already making noise. And I'm going to draw a parallel, for the point I want to make. Since the departure of Jammeh out of this country, economic forces are still in this country. So the economic forces seemingly are providing services that the Gambian National Army should be able to provide. Jammeh has left this country over 2 years. So the question is, why is ECOMIG still here? Whether the Gambia government is paying ECOMIG or whether the international community, are supporting in that regard, doesn't matter. The GNA seems to be sidelined, and perhaps maybe this is what the CDS is looking at and saying, if I don't do something, perhaps, we risk the possibility of another 1994 or even 1981. So let me try and see how the army could be gainfully engaged, and perhaps because of this, they are now looking at going into agriculture. I mean, is that a plausible argument? What's your take on that?
Well, it's possible. I don't know if that's the case. I'm not, obviously I don't have any inside knowledge on the decision making at the military. I think that I would find that decision making highly problematic, because let's look at it this way. If you as the head of the military, if you are going to sit down and say, well, given what is spent on me, I need to go and do something else to prove my worth. I mean, in a way, it's admitting that maybe there is, you are in a way admitting there's an existential crisis. In other words, do we have a reason to be here? Let me give a parallel example. Suppose, I know the budget that goes to the, have a rough idea of the budget that goes to the Ministry of Interior, which covers the police. But how many times have you heard anyone complain, oh, we're spending all of this money on the police, it's too much? Well, no, because no.
And they are not doing anything.
Exactly. You don't hear anybody complain that, because nobody questions the need, the fundamental need of having internal law enforcement.
Yeah.
This is very important. Whether or not teachers are teaching, you don't hear anybody complain, how many millions are we spending, giving to teachers? Nobody does it for health, as well. If anything, you complain that those sectors are not getting enough. Now, if we are putting all of these resources into the military, so there is this, it is a, I don't think he would admit to that, but the fact that they came up, this is a possible reaction, I think to me suggests that maybe subconsciously they are aware that the need for an army in the Gambia, for our context, is not obvious. Yeah. Now, it's interesting you mentioned ECOMIG. Now, ECOMIG, they are composed of soldiers from another country, but their role here actually in the Gambia today is not actually, there is no overlap with the army. The role of ECOMIG here today is to maintain internal security. The Gambia is not under threat of invasion from any force, from any country. So if there is a security sector here, a security force in the country that should feel threatened in terms of being made redundant by the presence of ECOMIG, it should be the police. Think about it. It's the police that have a role for internal security, not the military. But yet still, because this security force, these economic forces are soldiers, they put on camouflage, they dress like soldiers, they operate like soldiers. Actually, they are soldiers from other countries. The fact that there is that, discomfort about their presence and the implication of that for the military, I think, again, raises good question, and the fundamental, not only good question, but fundamental question. And the fundamental question is, as a country, do we need a military? What is their role? To me, whether it's the military trying to reassess its role, reposition itself in the country, or whether the government or the country as a whole trying to assess the need, this is the question we need to ask ourselves. Once we answer that question, other problems, the answers to other problems will just reveal themselves. This is the fundamental thing that I think, even the army, subconsciously, the CDS, their pronouncement sort of reveal that they themselves are not even sure that they have a fundamental role. Because if the military has a fundamental, the need that we have a military for, if that need is there should be no pressure, overt or covert, no pressure on them to actually find out other avenues of demonstrating their worth in the country.
I also want to go, since we're discussing this point, on the article that you published in the Voice newspaper. And it had a very strong caption on it that says, "The military has no role in agriculture. Cancel the Army Agro venture." And you seem to be making the argument that is there a need for the military? And perhaps that is a question that we as a country should ask ourselves. And here I want to go as far back as 1981. When we had the first coup d'etat in this country. And at the time, the same question was being raised by people who were in authority and even by the citizenry. Does the Gambia need a military? Because what we had at the time was internal security arrangements. We had, the police force, and I think what they used to call depot. I don't know what depot was.
Force.
The field force, you know. So when President Jawara, Sir Dawda came and created a military, there were questions around that. I mean, I was in high school at the time, and these were things that we discussed at the time. And believe it or not, we had made the point, especially, when we had around that time when the students were demonstrating, because because it was those demonstrations really, that led to the 1994 coup d'etat, which gave impetus to the 1994 coup d'etat. And we had said at the time that the military is ultimately what would take Jawara out of here, and that is what happened. So the question now is, as you are saying, do we need a military? And this is a question that we have to answer as a country, especially at this particular point in time when we are talking about New Gambia, the new dispensation. It's perhaps an assessment that we need to make. And amidst the review that is being done on the military, as well, one would think that perhaps these would have been issues that would have been addressed, looked at, because I recall not too long ago you had CDSs and other army heads who were invited from across West Africa when we were looking at the validation of the paper that would have emanated from that review of repositioning and trying to professionalize the Gambian army. But to come back to the point that you were making, you had said initially that the role of the military is to ensure the territorial integrity of the country and to provide security as long as the citizens of this country is concerned. If we perhaps get to the point where we do away with the army, then what happens? Because we are within Senegal. Yes, I know you also made a similar argument that because we are within Senegal, perhaps we don't have to worry much. If we have a strengthened economic and political ties with Senegal, we would not have to worry. But the possibility is always there that there could be some sort of animosity between the two governments. And if that happens and we don't have a military, then what? Do we leave ourselves open, for any possibility of Senegal, seizing power and doing perhaps the unthinkable as long as the country is concerned? Because we know there's a lot of economic interest from the side of the Senegal in terms of the Gambia. This is a fact, and this is a fact that goes as far back as the Jawara days, and this was one of the reasons why the Senegambia Confederation did not last. So because of that, perhaps would one say that perhaps there is a need for the army, but we need to clamp down on its size and perhaps get to the level of countries like what's this country? Is it Geneva? Geneva is the capital. Switzerland.
Switzerland.
Yeah.
Okay.
Perhaps adopt the Switzerland model.
Okay. Well, that's a very interesting question, and I think it's a valid question. It's something that whenever I have floated this position, it has come up. Now, as you correctly summarized my points quite well, which is my point being our best security guarantee is having good relations with Senegal. It's good for us not only security-wise but economically. Now, obviously, it's a possibility that our current good relations with Senegal may not last. Now, what I want to do is think about the alternative. Suppose the time comes when our relationships break down to such an extent that fighting breaks out. Now, usually when I tell people that we should scrap the military, the first response is that we agree that it is too big, it should be brought to size, a smaller size. Now, let's let's say we bring it to the size of that we had on the Jawara, which is about 1,000. No, you think an army with the size of 1,000 can stop or even slow down an invasion from Senegal? Absolutely not. So,
well, it depends on what sort of a military capacity and capabilities you have. Air power and
I'm going to come to that actually. Okay. So, if you want to have a military that is strong enough to defend us against Senegal, what are you looking for? You're looking for a military that is very, very, that's going to be much bigger than what we currently have. That is going to be much more equipped. That is going to be much more trained. Now think about the budgetary implications of that. Currently, we have close about 5% of our GDP, and we don't even have good weapons. We have hand-me-down weapons from Nigeria. We have poorly trained recruits. Now imagine if you want to have a military that is big enough in size, equipped enough, and well-trained enough that they would be able to defend us against any external aggression from Senegal. What would be the economic cost? It would be economically, no question about it, it will ruin us economically. So whenever you're looking at this, you have to balance cost. You have to balance the benefit against the cost. See, so you can have a strong military, well-equipped, but the cost of that would be immediate and would be continuous. Against what contingency? 1 in a billion event that will come, there'll be a time when we might actually go to war with Senegal. The probability of that is very low. The best defense for the Gambia in an event that our relationships break down with Senegal is let their soldiers march in. The international community, more specifically ECOWAS, wouldn't stand around to have like one big neighbor simply marching in and annexing. That's not something that's going to stand. Your best response towards that is just to, instead of having, the worst thing you can have is have fighting on your soil. If that's fighting between Gambia and Senegal, it's not going to be on Senegalese soil. It's going to be on Gambian soil. The best thing we should do is avoid that fight. So the best course of action for Gambia, is not to have a military based on an unlikely scenario where relations between Gambia and Senegal would break down to such an extent that Senegal may want to invest. That is that's a low probability event. The cost to us would be so ruinous. What? So we are starving, but then we're going around happy saying that at least Senegal cannot invade us. What benefit is that?
Yeah. It will not put food on the table.
Exactly. So going around, holding your head high, saying that, well, nobody will invade us now. Well, who would want to invade a hungry country, starving country in the first place? No country. The last thing you want, Senegal might even want to build a fence between them and us to prevent refugees from streaming from the Gambia and going into Senegal.
True. Let me come to to another point, and this perhaps. Looking at the AGO GNA initiative. Now, I know recently with that pronouncement, a number of people that I've spoken to have pinpointed that perhaps this initiative is a good initiative, and this is their reasoning. Their reasoning is that, relating to the point that I made earlier, that at least the army, is now going to be tasked to provide for their consumption needs. Yeah, but from what the CDS is saying, it actually transcends providing for the army making for its own, provisions. But in the event that they would tailor down on this initiative and focus in the army providing for themselves, feeding themselves without having to depend on government coffers. Yeah, would that be a welcomed initiative? Because we know in other countries, and here I could cite the US, for example, they have initiatives, Army Engineering Corps you hear of in the US, they don't feed themselves, but when there are disasters, perhaps this is something that, the Army could help in terms of contributing to the national economic development of this country outside of their key mandate, which is maintaining security, one, and also ensuring the territorial integrity of the country. They could help in disaster relief and disaster management, as what obtains in other developed countries. Army Engineering Corps, for example, in the U.S.
Sure.
They could equally say, okay, fine, since we want to support in the economic development of this country, let us, amongst ourselves, come up with agricultural schemes exclusively for the Army. I mean, would that be a welcomed initiative? And is this something that they should be looking at? Or do you think ultimately it would spill over and they would end up trying to feed the country instead of limiting that to themselves?
No, it wouldn't. It would still be a bad idea. It still be a very bad idea. Now, think of it from the point of view of ACO. This is a multi-million-dollar agribusiness farm from the United States with operations all over the world. What interest would it have to engage with the military just to feed the army? Why would it want that? Why would an agribusiness company that has, access to markets across the world come to Gambia? This is a company, not a philanthropist organization. It has, a fiduciary responsibility to its owners and shareholders, and it's profitable. And so far, it has been doing that tremendously well. Why in the world would it come here and limit itself to just providing food for our military? Of course not. The idea is if they are going to go to a country, the investment would be substantial. They don't get to be a big multinational company for going around and throwing money or feeding some sector of that economy. They go into an economy, as they are supposed to do, like any private business, to go make investment and make profit. And it's not going, anytime you go into another country involves a lot of cost. There is a lot of risk. You do not go into it unless the returns adjusted for risk are very high. So there is no scenario in this world where ACO would come and have a joint venture with the military where they just restrict themselves, the army just growing something to feed itself. What would be in it for ACO? Why, what's their reason for coming? Of course not. ACO would want to come here and have a very, very, ACO has an asset base that is more than our, not our GDP, sorry, but our budget, a whole government budget. Why would they come and just, limit themselves to just feeding the army? Obviously, they would want to go and run as large an operation as possible. So next thing today we'll be told the army is going to be feeding itself. Next thing we know, given that they are working with the army, you could have land expropriations across the country. If you complain, all of a sudden you start hearing, well, what are you complaining about? We are going to engage in agriculture, feed the country. How could you be against feeding the country? But obviously not. This company would, first of all, if you are an investor going into any location, any new location, your local partner, your choice of local partner is very important. For ACO to choose the army, they must believe, either they were given that assurances, either explicit or implicit, that if they come here, that they will have some access to resources that otherwise would be difficult to get. Either it will be manpower, because any military officer who participates in that venture, we are effectively, Gambia is subsidizing ACO, because these military officers already have a huge budget. Their livelihood, their benefits are being paid by the Gambia government. Their participation in any commercial activity with any commercial entity means we are effectively subsidizing that company.
I want to go as far back as last year when President Barrow visited Egypt. And in Egypt, an MOU was signed with Egypt. The contents of that MOU, I'm not privy to. I don't want to speculate. But I wonder if it's too much of a coincidence that AGO as a company has a strong presence in Egypt, and engaged in Egypt, in the Egypt agricultural sector. And we know that in Egypt, the army, plays a very critical role in agriculture. So I wonder, did AGO pick up what obtained during that visit of President Barrow in Egypt and the signing of the MOU, and perhaps latched onto that opportunity to now pursue the same interest that they are pursuing in Egypt amongst other countries in which the military plays a very critical role in agriculture. I don't know whether, I mean, you have thought about this. And if so, what's your take, on this?
Yeah, I mean, just like you, I don't even know the content of that MOU, and it's possible that that visit precipitated this agreement. It's also possible that it was just a coincidence.
Okay.
Be that as it may, I mean, there's just no two way about it. This is a objectively bad venture to be going into. Yeah.
The saying goes that whoever controls your food, if I control your feeding, I could ultimately control you as a person.
Absolutely.
And one of the points that is being made, or one of the fears of people, is that in the event the Gambia National Army gets into agriculture, and in the event it becomes a formidable player, and we know that for it to become a formidable player, a number of things would have to happen. Some people even question whether the Gambia National Army could become a formidable player in agriculture. But the possibility does exist that it could. In the event it does, and it becomes a formidable player across all the sectors of agriculture, if they control the feeding of this nation, then ultimately they could very well control the votes of people. Because, if my meat, if my fish, if my vegetables, processed meat, unprocessed meat, you name it, if the main source, and here I'm talking from the perspective of a monopoly, and we know what happens on the situations of monopoly.
Absolutely.
If you control all of these things, then effectively you could control my vote. And if you control my vote, and your commander-in-chief could then very well perpetually stay in power. So is this fear justified in terms of why this deal should not be promoted in the first place and why it should be scrapped?
It is very justified. This is a real, this is not some speculation, by the way, because, maybe you could dismiss these fears if this was some speculation, but we have seen actual evidence of this. And it's good that you mentioned Egypt, because I think it provides a very instructive example. This is the situation where you have the military engaged in almost every sector of the economy. They basically, there's a report out there now, you have an army officer in every government branch, every government sector, because if you want to get something done, you cannot get it done without the military. Whether it's agriculture, whether it's schools, to build schools, whether it is to the tourism sector, to build hotels, anything, you really need, the military is so entrenched and it has its tentacles across every sector of the economy. I doubt that any reform now could really scale back their activity. So you have this situation where the army becomes a mini state unto itself that operates outside of the rules, the regulation, and the laws of the country. Because if you want to look, lift the veil and look into what's happening, the retort is, we are the army, we have no commercial interests, we are doing this for development. But the reality is that the military brass, they are the richest and the most connected people. So you have a situation where the activities of the military is completely unaudited. We already have a problem with state-owned enterprises that are not regularly audited. We want to add this problem where a country with bigger capacity cannot even audit. They have no idea currently the size of the military's commercial activities in Egypt as a share of GDP, because nobody can find out, because it's so opaque, because they are not under oversight. According to, in the Gambia currently, all state-owned enterprises are supposed to be under the, overseen by their sector ministries, at the same time by the PPP unit, and the PPP directorate in the Ministry of Finance. Those two, we all know, out of the 13 or so 12 state-owned enterprises we have in the country, probably no more than 3 or 4 are actually doing very well. The rest are performing poorly because even with only this handful, they cannot do an appropriate oversight. Now imagine we have to import the problem, the scale of Egypt into the country. How, do we have any institution into the country to oversee the military? We currently don't have, because there is nothing in the country that prepares us for something like this. So there would be no body, no agency within the whole country that can provide appropriate oversight of this engagement. They can sign anything. And I think your other point, basically, it's absolutely right. Whoever has so much power in the economy is going to control everything. With the military, essentially, controlling so many resources, we will not even worry about coup d'etats. Coup d'etats will be superfluous. If you control so many resources, you control the government. So when the military wanted to remove, the Morsi government, they simply just shut down the economy, and Sisi just took over the country. You don't even need an overt military. You can even be in the background controlling. So there will be no need for even coup d'etats. Instead of the military, as required by the Constitution, to be subordinate to civilian authorities, it will be the civilian authorities and politicians who are subordinate to the military.
Okay. Let me make this point. Now, some people have made the argument, and you indicated that Argo is a big multinational company with a number of operations across the world. I took time to look at the annual reports of Argo from 2015 to 2018, and it's quite impressive, to say the least. Some people in some quarters have made the point that perhaps the interest of Argo is in the commercialization drive or aspirations of this country. Their interest is perhaps to sell agricultural machinery. And perhaps in some quarters within this economy, that interest has been seized and hijacked by some people with some ulterior motives to now come and perhaps make this thing, blow this thing out of proportion and creating what it seemingly isn't. And people have said that the interest of Argo is just to sell commercial agricultural equipment, which we know they are renowned for across the globe. Do you think that argument is a valid one, or would you still stick to the point that for Argo to engage a country the size of the Gambia, the only way to really make profits at the end of the day, that is their bottom line objective, is to go full-fledged? And perhaps the people who fear that who believe that their interest is only to sell machinery, are not seeing the whole picture.
Well, if their interest is selling machinery, why not have distributors in the country? We have bigger companies that are bigger than Argo, that are selling machinery that currently we are buying here. You look around, you step outside of these studios and go on the street, you can easily find a machinery that is created by a company that is 10 times the size of Argo. You do not need to sign an agreement with the military of a country to enable you to have a foothold in that country and sell your goods. Maybe only if you are trying to look for certain probably inappropriate deals, that I can probably understand, but it still wouldn't make it right. And what is also important is I want to stress this, before we run out of time, is that, you see, a country like the Gambia, whenever you are dealing with a multinational company like Argo, you need to be cognizant of your limitation. You need to know any sector, any ministry in the country, you need to know that you are dealing with a company that is motivated, like all companies, they are motivated, they are well-resourced, they have highly competent people in there, they know what is good, they know what is in their interest.
And they have intelligence of that country on their fingertips.
Exactly. They've done their market study, they've done their analysis, they come well prepared. You do not go and just, your ministry, even the Ministry of Finance would be completely outmatched if they want to you know, in my, I have a lot of experience with this. At ADB, ADB has financed many projects, and you always see, you know, they are finance commercial operations, and you see agreements in some projects where the country has signed a deal with a foreign company, thinking it's an excellent deal, but then when somebody looks at it correctly, they realize it's very, very unfavorable. So when you do not have the capacity, you sign something, it may seem advantageous to you, but believe me, that company had done its homework. So many donors and development agencies have realized this problem. So for instance, the ADB has what is called the African Legal Support Facility. This is a unit that provides grants to African governments. It's on demand. You go and request, they'll provide. In fact, the Ministry of Petroleum and Energy have made good use of this facility in their negotiation with oil companies. So if you are going to have a concession or an agreement with a commercial entity, you have to recognize your own limitations, and then you ask for assistance so that when you have an agreement which becomes legally binding, you know, you are not taken to the cleaners. So, but we have this situation right now where ACO signed an agreement with the Army. We know GAIPA wasn't involved. We know the PPP Directorate in the Ministry of Finance wasn't involved. We know the Office of the Permanent Secretary for Responsible Investment wasn't involved. Who in the Army is equipped and has the right experience and the capacity to negotiate on equal footing with ACO? You know, I don't know what the details of the deals are, but what are the chances that that deal is in the best interest of the country?
Perhaps the last question, the last point we would have an opportunity to discuss on this program is, amidst all of this, I mean, we have spoke about the fact that such a deal should have been scrutinized or at least be brought to the attention of the likes of GAIPA and the likes of the PPP Directorate at the Ministry of Finance. But one thing that we have not said is the Ministry of Agriculture. I mean, I find this totally unbelievable that the Minister of Agriculture is the advisor on matters of the sector to the President of the Republic. If ACO comes into the country and ACO is spearheading a deal that borders on the sector of agriculture, if anything, the Minister of Agriculture should be in the forefront of this deal. Even if the Army was going to be involved, the Army should be a secondary party, but the primary party should be the Minister or the Ministry of Agriculture. So the question is, where is the Minister of Agriculture in all of this, and where is the Permanent Secretary? Because none of them, you know, have said anything, despite all the publications that have been in the papers, despite the pronouncement, despite the talking. We have not had anything from the Ministry of Agriculture. And really, that is worrying. I mean, are they taking a side, are they taking a back seat because of the fact that it's the Army? The CDS has taken the lead in this, and because the CDS has taken the lead in this, everybody is, okay, it's the Army, so therefore let us just hold back. Then where is the change that we are talking of under the New Gambia dispensation? I mean, but honestly, where is the Ministry of Agriculture in this?
It is a deafening silence. And it sort of, it heralded, you know, to me, this thing is a sign of, you know, the problems that can come. Now, myself, I was expecting at some point the Ministry of Agriculture would say something, or during the announcement. But as you mentioned, and I searched all the newspapers, you know, I said maybe it came out in some article that I have not actually seen, but it didn't. So this is is really an abdication of responsibility as far as the Ministry of Agriculture is concerned. They should have something to say about this. And believe me, if they do their homework, they do their job, they shouldn't be approving this thing, and they should make their displeasure and their disapproval of this known. And if they believe this is a good deal, they owe it to the Gambian people to come out, and then make the case for it, and let us judge them on the merits of the arguments they are making. Now, the Ministry of Agriculture seniors the CDS, because the CDS is the top military officer. In a democracy, the military is subordinate to civilian authority. There is a Ministry of Defense. So the highest person in the Ministry of Defense is the Minister of Defense. Currently is the President, but that the ministerial level position is at the same level as the Ministry of Agriculture. So the Minister of Agriculture should not be taking a back seat to the CDS.
But he is the advisor to the president on matters of agriculture.
Exactly. Now the question is the president somebody who is going to sit and listen, or should he have the judgment to make sure that he hears something from the Ministry of Agriculture before he accepts and gives his blessing to this deal?
Ladies and gentlemen, a number of issues to ponder on. This deal, the ARCO Gambia National Army deal, is one that is of interest to us as citizens of this country. We will, under the same program, extend invitations to this CDS or to that office, the Gambia National Army, for them to come and clarify for us why is it that this deal is such of an interest to the Gambia National Army. If the deal is indeed a good deal for the country, if the Gambia National Army feels that this is going to benefit the economy, there is nothing stopping them from coming and talking and pinpointing to us why this deal is a must deal and why we should, as a country, support this initiative that they are pursuing. But that justification, that convincing, cannot be done without the full belief and support of the citizenry of this country. But most importantly, we equally would be extending an invitation to the Ministry of Agriculture, GAIPA, the Public-Private Partnership Directorate at the Ministry of Finance. What is happening with this deal? It is New Gambia, new dispensation, an issue that is topicable, an issue that should be debated. Let's discuss this, because at the end of the day, agriculture remains the mainstay of this country, a very important sector that we should not play with. Dr. Gajigo, it was a pleasure having you on the program, and we look forward to having you again on other interesting topics.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.